Welcome to the debate. Imagine looking out your living room window at a city you've lived in your entire life, only to realize the country you belong to, well, it no longer exists.
Right.
The street signs have changed, the flags are different, and, the monuments celebrate an independence that feels, to your mind anyway, like an amputation.
Yeah, it's a profound shock.
Exactly. This is the profound cognitive dissonance of phantom empire syndrome. It's what happens when a person's physical body resides in a new sovereign state, but their psyche remains tightly locked inside a vanished empire.
It is a fascinating and, frankly, deeply tragic psychological landscape. And today we are grounding our discussion in a short, incredibly dense, and suffocatingly atmospheric excerpt from the novel Neighbors by E. Vikrutasov.
It really is suffocating.
Oh, totally. We're looking inside the apartment of the Zhdunov family. They are celebrating New Year's Eve in a newly independent country, and they are completely alienated from the reality right outside their glass.
Right. But before we dive into the text, let's, lay our analytical cards on the table. Today we are debating the literary and psychological merits of this piece. I will argue that this excerpt operates as a brilliant, surgical, and hyper-realistic X-ray of post-imperial trauma and resentment.
And I will contend that it is, a heavy-handed, polarizing caricature. I argue that the author ruthlessly sacrifices genuine empathy for a collection of tired stereotypes, creating cardboard targets rather than, living people.
Well, to truly understand the claustrophobia and the tension we are arguing about, we need to feel the weight of the material. So I am going to read the translated excerpt in its entirety from start to finish.
And I will just briefly and naturally weave in a few cultural context clues as you go, just to ensure our English-speaking audience grasps the exact textures Vikrutasov is using without breaking the narrative spell.
Perfect. So here is the excerpt from Neighbors. The Zhdunov family gathered at the New Year's table. On the table were tangerines, Olivier salad.
Which, just quickly, is that heavy traditional potato and mayonnaise salad.
Right. So Olivier salad, sallow.
The classic cured pork lard.
Cutlets, kvass.
Right, the fermented bread drink.
Beer, stolichная vodka, and jellied fish. Outside the window, festive fireworks went off against the backdrop of the Independence Monument with the Golden Man, while inside the room, a Soviet garland hung beneath the ceiling. On the television, the irony of fate was playing. On the wall, on a carpet, under a portrait of Vivi Butin, hung a shotgun, 2 crossed sabers, and nearby, on a nail, a Cossack hat. On the sofa sat 2 German shepherds.
Wow.
Yeah. Quote, "Well, Happy New Year Moscow time," said Albert Gerasimovich, raising a faceted glass. His voice was hoarse and raspy from smoking. We still remember those New Years when the USSR anthem played on the radio, not this curly-murly.
He's using that dismissive slang, curly-murly, to mock the unfamiliar native language of the country they actually live in.
Exactly. The quote continues, "There was order, plombier ice cream."
The iconic, incredibly rich Soviet ice cream.
Kvass, Zhiguyevskaya beer. Zinaida joined in, rolling her eyes nostalgically and adjusting a t-shirt with the words, "Born in the USSR." Yes, beer from the barrel, the taste of childhood, and the red banner, the parades, the subotniks.
Those are the mandatory, unpaid, volunteer work days on the weekends.
"Oh, what a country," interjected their neighbor, Edgar Ashatovich. He looked at Zinaida askance, his head tilted low. That was a motherland. Not like now. Mumbits.
And he's dropping a highly derogatory slur for rural locals there.
Mumbits everywhere, coming in from the ols.
The traditional rural villages.
We can do it again," Petrovich wheezed with a slurring tongue, striking the table with his fist. On the television, Vladimir Putin delivered a toast. Everyone fell silent. Someone wiped away a tear. Someone crossed themselves. "He's a good man," Zinaida broke the silence with a trembling voice, picking up a cold cutlet with her fork. "It's hard for him right now. He thinks of us. It's calm with him. But here, All around, these Nazis, the schoolboy Sasha prompted, clenching his teeth.
Jeez.
And we built cities for them, Petrovich exhaled, coughing hoarsely and carefully spitting into the jar he always carried with him. Putting the jar into his jacket pocket, he approvingly patted his grandson on the shoulder. The anthem of the Russian Federation began to play. Everyone stood up.
I mean, it is suffocating, but in my view, it's suffocating for the wrong reasons. Let's start with the material world the author constructs right there in the first paragraph.
Okay.
It is theatrical clutter to the point of absolute absurdity. On a single table, we have tangerines, olivier, sallow, cutlets, kvass, beer, vodka, and jellied fish. Then look at the wall. A carpet, a Putin portrait, crossed sabers, a shotgun, a Cossack hat.
Right, it's dense.
And 2 German shepherds on the sofa. I mean, in literature, when you want to establish an atmosphere of someone clinging to an imperial past, you use synecdoche. You mention the Cossack hat resting on a modern imported chair. That single detail creates tension between the past and the present.
I see what you're saying, but
Throwing the entire prop department of a Soviet theater onto one page destroys the reader's suspension of disbelief. It crosses the line from realism into a bad joke.
see, I think applying the rules of traditional literary minimalism here completely misses the psychological reality of these characters. This apartment isn't just a setting meant to provide, aesthetic flavor.
Then what is it?
It functions mechanically as a hyperbaric chamber of psychological defense. When a sovereign identity collapses, the human brain experiences literal spatial disorientation.
Okay.
The characters look out the window at the Independence Monument, and their nervous systems cannot process the fact that they are now foreigners in their own home.
And you are arguing they regulate their nervous systems through interior decorating.
It's not decorating, it's structural engineering for the psyche. Think about the mechanism of cognitive dissonance. To protect themselves from the reality glowing right outside their glass, they must build a physical barricade out of every possible artifact of their past glory.
But every single artifact?
Yes, these props, the sabers, the portrait, the heavy jellied fish, they act as load-bearing walls. They can't just have one Cossack hat because one hat isn't heavy enough to block out the Independence Monument.
Right.
They need to artificially pressurize their environment with overwhelming density. If you remove even one of those props, the air of the present might seep in and their entire psychological illusion would instantly collapse.
Okay, but if the physical environment is a barricade, as you say, then the characters themselves should feel like real humans desperately trying to survive inside it.
And I'd argue they do.
But the theory of the psychological hyperbaric chamber falls apart for me because the characters don't actually converse. Human beings, even those deeply entrenched in denial or nostalgia, still have interpersonal dynamics. They have underlying subtexts. Well, but in this room, Zenaida literally wears a Born in the USSR t-shirt and lists off plombier ice cream, kvass, Zhigulyovskoye beer, as if she's reciting a grocery list of state propaganda.
Yes, but that's the...
But Petrovich just slams the table and slurs, "We can do it again." The schoolboy mutters, "Nazis. These aren't people, they are megaphones." The author is treating them like puppets with no internal life, engaging in linguistic puppetry to serve a political pamphlet.
You are searching for standard literary subtext in a population that has undergone severe linguistic infection. The lack of a traditional, nuanced internal monologue is exactly what Vykrutosov is diagnosing here. Decades of imperial conditioning and state television have literally overwritten their internal thought processes.
But linguistic infection implies a total loss of agency. Are you saying state television has literally erased their ability to think, or are they willingly participating in this performance to self-soothe?
I am saying the line between the two has completely dissolved. They speak in slogans because the slogans have entirely replaced complex thought. The Phantom Empire is quite literally puppeteering them. And if we want to look at the deep sociology of this, nowhere is it more masterfully illustrated than with the neighbor, Edgar Eshhutovich.
Right. The Armenian neighbor who suddenly chimes in about the motherland and complains about the rural locals.
Yes, This is a profound, masterful inversion of the old Soviet friendship of peoples myth. Here you have a man of Armenian descent living in an independent, likely Central Asian country, given the context of the Golden Man Monument and the Alls.
Right. Historically, he belongs to a marginalized group within the broader imperial structure.
Exactly. And yet his nostalgia for the Russian Empire is just as fierce as the ethnic Russians in the room. He complains about the local people calling them mumbets. This demonstrates how imperial nostalgia is paradoxically international in its chauvinism.
I'll grant you that it demonstrates the mechanics of assimilation. Marginalized groups often adopt the bigotry of the ruling class to buy psychological safety. By adopting the empire's utter disdain for the local periphery, Edgar feels like he belongs to the quote-unquote civilized imperial center.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a known historical phenomenon, using chauvinism as currency to elevate your own status in a shifting world.
Exactly. It's a brilliant observation of how colonial hierarchies infect the minds of the colonized. That isn't a cardboard cutout. That is a terrifyingly accurate sociological reality that the author captures in just 2 lines of dialogue.
I understand the sociology behind it, but the execution is utterly devoid of what I would call intellectual mercy.
Intellectual mercy?
Yes, a great writer should maintain a fundamental empathy for the human condition, even when critiquing it. Without it, you're not writing literature, you're just writing propaganda for the other side. You say this is a study of linguistic infection, but the author clearly views these characters with entomological disgust.
Oh, I wouldn't go that far.
He is! He's looking at them through a magnifying glass like repulsive bugs in a jar.
I strongly disagree that the text lacks empathy. You are missing the moment of piercing vulnerability that anchors the entire scene. Look at the silence during Putin's televised toast. Zenaida picks up a cold cutlet. Her voice is literally trembling, and she says, "It's hard for him right now. He thinks of us."
Expressing trembling pity for an autocrat who projects imperial aggression isn't exactly a universal trigger for reader empathy.
But look at the psychological mechanism of that pity. It reveals a terrifying total disorientation behind their aggressive facade. They are sitting in a foreign country completely alienated, heavily armed with sabers and shotguns, and yet they project all of their own fragility onto the most powerful man on the television.
I mean, I see the projection, but
They feel incredibly small, terrified of the world outside their window, so they imagine the autocrat needs their sympathy. That trembling voice isn't a bug in a jar. It's a tragic portrait of displaced people who have nothing left but a televised phantom.
you point to her trembling voice, but look at how the author actively chooses to end the scene. We move straight from that supposed vulnerability to Petrovich. He boasts, "We built cities for them," and then he coughs hoarsely and carefully spits into a jar he always carried with him.
Right.
And then he pats his grandson on the shoulder. This spit jar is the ultimate proof of the author's disgust, and frankly, it's intellectually lazy.
How is a physical detail lazy?
Because by making Petrovich physically repulsive, literally hoarding his own phlegm, the author removes any requirement for the reader to engage with the complex tragedy of losing one's homeland. It replaces complex historical analysis with a cheap freak show.
That's a bit harsh.
It's true. Millions of people experienced the sudden drawing of new borders after the Soviet collapse that left them stranded in countries that were suddenly no longer their own. The disorientation was a massive generational trauma. But by creating grotesque villains spitting into jars, the author offers the reader a very cheap sense of moral superiority.
Well,
We get to look at Petrovich and think, well, at least I'm not that disgusting. It lets us off the hook entirely. It polarizes the audience instead of forcing us to genuinely examine the roots of the crisis.
Okay, the spit jar is not a cheap freak show. It is the most powerful, functionally necessary metaphor in the entire excerpt. It operates as a perverse reliquary.
A reliquary preserves sacred artifacts, a bone of a saint, a splinter of the true cross. How does a jar of phlegm fit that definition?
Because in the twisted, pathological logic of the Phantom Empire, anything that comes from the glorious past, even sickness, even bodily waste, must be hoarded and protected from the new reality outside. Petrovich is literally conserving pieces of his own rotting interior. He cannot let anything go. Satire of this magnitude should provoke a visceral gag reflex. Vikrutasov isn't writing a delicate tragedy because sentimental nostalgia inevitably mutates into aggression. Look at the narrative pipeline in the text.
What do you mean?
They start by nostalgically remembering ice cream and beer, and within 5 sentences, the grandfather is violently slamming the table, shouting, "We can do it again," and the schoolboy is muttering Nazis. The spit jar is there to physically manifest the pathology. The nostalgia is not harmless, it is diseased.
But rendering them purely as a disease betrays the literary mandate to understand human suffering. If they are just diseased caricatures, the author isn't illuminating the pathology of resentment, he's just taking revenge on the people who suffer from it.
Taking a clinical, unsparing look at how the comfort of the past curdles into the hostility of the present isn't revenge. It's necessary diagnostics. We have to look at the toxicity of this phantom nostalgia, the physical hoarding of the past, before we can understand how it drives real-world aggression.
Well, we clearly draw different conclusions about the author's methodology.
Yeah, I think we do.
To summarize my stance, while the scene undeniably captures a specific real-world disorientation, it operates as a polarizing caricature. The sheer volume of props, the slogan-driven dialogue, and the grotesque imagery prevent the text from achieving true literary depth. It observes the symptoms of imperial collapse, but does so with a sneer, sacrificing empathy for easy satire.
And from my perspective, the text is a merciless but absolutely essential X-ray of historical trauma. The suffocating clutter, the infected language, the terrifying fragility masked by aggression, these are hyper-realistic manifestations of a psychological barricade. The grotesque elements physically confront the reader with the reality of a mind trapped in a vanished empire.
As always, we are dealing with material dense enough to support multiple, deeply opposed readings. We're not here to declare a definitive winner, because literature of this weight demands individual reckoning.
Exactly.
Before we wrap up, I want to explicitly ask all of you listening and watching to engage with us. Please like the video, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. Which perspective resonated more with you? We genuinely want to know.
Yes, please let us know.
Also, I want to proudly announce to our audience that the debate is released in 2 languages, Russian and English. We highly encourage you to share the show across both languages to help expand this space for rigorous, respectful discourse.
Thank you for that. And to leave you with one final thought, I want to circle back to the medical metaphor we started with today. We've spent our time examining this literary X-ray of phantom empire syndrome, looking at the psychological barricades and the reliquaries of a vanished past. The question that lingers is this: can this phantom pain ever truly be cured if the patient categorically refuses to admit that the empire has been amputated?
A profound question we will leave you to ponder. Goodbye.
Goodbye.